Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar here on what's the price of carbon, carbon pricing, and how can it help fight climate change, which is part of our webinar series, It's Time to Decarbonise. So we can see the number of attendees is gradually increasing, so I'll just give it another moment or two, and then I'll introduce you to Katja, and then we can get started. Our numbers are still going up, so I'm going to give it another 1 minute, and then we'll get going. Okay, so I think we can start now. A few people can keep joining as we go, but it's time to get started. So, hello again, everybody, and yeah, welcome. If you didn't hear my introduction a minute ago, so welcome to the webinar. What is the price of carbon? So we're going to be talking about carbon pricing and how it can help fight climate change, which is part of our webinar series. It's time to decarbonise. So my name is Stuart Walker. I'm a net zero consultant in the Energy Saving Trust evaluation team. And I'd like to introduce you to my colleague Katja Zrilli, who's also a net zero consultant in the Energy Saving Trust evaluation team. She has a focus on organizational carbon measurement and net zero plan development, has many years of experience in this, and knows a lot about carbon pricing. So the session today is going to be recorded so that people who can't attend can obviously join in. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so we have some pre-submitted questions that we will answer, but please use the questions box as we go through if you would like to submit any further questions. We'd also like to just highlight, if you'd like to have an informal chat specifically about your organization, I think Nora is going to put a link in the chat where there will be a form that you can fill in, and we can set up a conversation with Laura in our business development team, or with Katja, with myself, or whoever's the most appropriate person, and we'd be pleased to kind of talk through some specific stuff for your organization. Okay, so I will now hand over to Katja, and I'll turn my camera off, let Katja do a presentation, and then afterwards I'll be back and we'll answer some questions. So over to you, Katja.
Yep. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you everyone for joining the session today. So I would like just to begin the presentation, our webinar with quickly outlining the agenda for today. So I would like to start just with quickly going through what is carbon pricing, understanding the definitions and different types of carbon pricing that exist. Then I'll move into the section where I outline a few reasons as to why you might consider implementing carbon pricing mechanisms in your organization. And at the end of this webinar, I will give a few practical tips on how to start implementing carbon pricing inside your organization if you would like to give it a go. So in terms of the carbon pricing and the types of carbon pricing. So the carbon pricing itself could be defined as a financial tool that reflects various aspects of climate change in financial decisions. When we look at the carbon pricing at a country level, it can be applied in various forms. A few examples are, for instance, I'm sure that some of you are aware of cap and trade scheme that we have in the UK. Previously, it was the emission trading scheme for the European Union, but after Brexit, UK exited the scheme and established their own. So in line with the schemes, certain organizations that fall under the scope are required to obtain and surrender allowances to cover their annual emissions. So if, let's say, you as an organization exceeded the amount of allowances and you would be required to go to the market and purchase additional carbon allowances. And on the other hand, if you as an organization you have not used all of your allowances, you can sell them on the market. So this in turn determines the price of this allowance or a price of the carbon emissions. Another example that carbon pricing, how carbon pricing can be applied on country level is tax. A good example is the upcoming regulation about it's called carbon border adjustment mechanism that will be soon introduced in the European Union. This will require the products that coming from countries with a lower carbon price to be taxed in line with the mechanism that soon will be established. So when we look at the carbon pricing at a lower level, on an organization level, again, there are many various ways of how you can implement the types of carbon pricing that you can use. The most two common types are shadow pricing and internal taxes or fees. So in terms of a shadow pricing is when you use the carbon pricing in your decision-making process, however, you do not levy the costs associated. So for instance, you can introduce a price of a carbon when choosing between different investment projects, or when you look into, let's say, acquiring new properties or moving to the new office, you can actively use this mechanism of carbon pricing. In terms of internal taxes or fees, this mechanism actually is applied when you would like to get the funds, and in most cases, these funds are then used for carbon reduction and other sustainability related activities. An example of internal fee could be when, let's say, an employee books a ticket for a plane, it's charged additional fee. So in line with, in accordance with the mileage of a trip and the type of the ticket, like a business class or economy class, etc. So and then this fund in turn can go into funding of various sustainable initiatives. So I just gave you a very brief overview and a few examples of how of the types of carbon pricing, by why as an organization you would actually even consider using this, why you would, how it could help you. Well, if you already have a GHG reduction, greenhouse gas emission reduction targets in place, and the net zero strategy in place, in certain ways, this can help you, the carbon pricing can help you to achieve your targets. It can also help you to prepare for potential regulations. So for instance, if you anticipate that in a few years' time, a certain regulations, for example, that doesn't apply to your organization or does not apply to your to the country where you operate, might actually be put in place, you can already start considering this, and by this demonstrating to your stakeholders that you're well aware of the risks associated and you well manage them. Obviously, through implementing internal fees, this can help you with funding the energy efficiency projects or any other sustainability activities that you would like to introduce. And probably one of the most important point is that it helps you to influence internal behaviors. So once there is a price that's been put on carbon, and you as an employee have to consider this in your decision-making process, you instantly start thinking about you need to consider this, and you need to start thinking about carbon emissions associated, and this helps you to raise awareness among different employees in the organization. And so if you decide that you'd probably like to give it a go and to implement carbon pricing, one of the ways that I just described, where to begin or what you should do, where to start as an organization. So I would suggest to keep it, to put it aside for a moment, and to begin with getting on a net zero path in the first place. We have a webinar, it already took place actually, that described on how you can get a net zero journey, and I believe that Nora will put a link in the chat that so you can rewatch this webinar, but I will briefly cover a few points in my just now about how you can get on a net zero journey in the first place before considering carbon, before start implementing carbon pricing tools. So the very first step is to measure your emissions. If you haven't done so, because we cannot manage what we haven't measured. So as most of you, or probably, I don't know, the majority of you are aware, there are three scopes of emission. They've been introduced by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol to differentiate between types of emissions. So the scope 1 emission, this will be your direct emissions. And a good example could apply to probably most of the representatives that are on this call is a gas boiler. So there is a combustion process that happens inside a gas boiler that's in your premises, in your offices or operated facilities. This results in a direct release of emission, and this will be the emission sitting under your scope 1. Scope 2 emissions are linked to the purchased energy, purchased electricity to operate your facilities again. And scope 3 emissions are all other emissions. They can include emissions associated with employees traveling, commuting, working from home, the purchased goods and services, the investments that you make as an organization. And probably majority of you already started measuring your scope 1, scope 2 emissions. What we recommend is to look into all the emission categories that apply to your organization, because that will help you to build an efficient strategy to reduce your emissions. So you can see on the screen example of our energy saving trust greenhouse gas emissions dashboard. And if we just focused on accounting scope 1, scope 2 emissions, we would miss a huge chunk of the emissions which sit in scope 3. And predominantly, this is the emissions associated with our purchased goods and services category. So by measuring in the first place, this allowed us to build an efficient strategy, and actually our strategy focuses a lot around purchased goods and services category, and we even have a dedicated target to reduce emissions in this category. So once you have this very holistic view and understanding of where you would like to move and how fast you would like to achieve the targets that you put in place, you can start looking whether the carbon pricing mechanism can actually help you to achieve your objectives. So the very first step is to get clarity on what you're trying to achieve. For instance, you probably would like to look into behavioral changes in a certain remit of your organization, or you would like to prepare for the future regulations. This will require you to choose a particular mechanism. You also need to define the boundaries. Will it apply only to some teams or departments in your organization, or will it apply to the entire organization? Will it apply to certain bits of your emissions, for example, business travel, or scope 1 or scope 2, or will it apply to also some categories of scope 3? So you will need to make a decision on that. And this will all then determine your approach and how you'll actually calculate your carbon price. So for instance, if you would like to prepare for future regulation, you will most probably use like this shadow pricing approach. And in this case, you can just align the price of the carbon with the anticipated anticipated price. So you can have a look at what's going on in the market, what's the price of the carbon in the market, or if it's not yet in place in your country, look at the other countries and see what's the price of carbon in there. If you would like to use the internal carbon pricing mechanism to influence your behaviors and to collect funds for sustainability reduction initiatives, you can roughly estimate what will be the funding required to implement these initiatives, and then divide it by the amount of emissions that you have, and by this get the carbon price. In any case, we do not recommend you to spend too much time to determine like the perfect carbon price. And once you get like a good understanding on the objectives, on the approach that you're going to use, and you put some numbers and you decided to go with this approach, start implementing this, start working on this, and constantly evaluate the results. Does the carbon price challenging enough? Is it high enough, or maybe it's too high? Need to see how it evolves and introduce necessary adjustments to your plans and to your mechanism where it's necessary. And it also, you can start small. You can start with doing some shadow pricing and not actually collecting any funds, and then move towards the actual collection of the funds. or you can apply their carbon pricing only, let's say, for business travel, and then expanding it further. In any case, this is an ongoing process, and you probably make some mistakes or something will not work. So, or maybe like the carbon pricing approach in general might not be the right approach for you as an organization, but yeah, it could be tried out, it could be, and it should be evaluated. And after the evaluation, this is where you will need to make decisions and adjustments to your plan and to your carbon pricing programs. And this is it from my side. Now I think we can move to the Q&A section.
Thank you, Katya. Great. Yes, so we're going to move to the Q&A section in a second. But first of all, we're just going to share 3 poll questions that will help us measure the knowledge gain to improve our webinars in future. So I think those will appear on the screen in a second. So if we could just do those quickly, then in a second we'll go to the question and answers. Okay, so I think we've had those 3 poll questions now. Thank you. So we'll move on to the Q&A section. I'd just like to quickly mention the form again. So if anybody would like to have a further chat, as I mentioned, with Katya or myself or Laura from Business Development, please fill in that form, and we can have a longer, more dedicated kind of conversation with you about exactly what you would like to talk about. Similarly, if you'd like to watch our previous webinar on setting a net zero plan and measuring emissions, you'll also find the link in there. But for now, back to the questions for today. So we've got a number of questions in the question and answer section of the webinar. So thank you for that. First of all, we'll just quickly go through some questions that were submitted previously. So again, if anybody, if we don't get a chance to answer your question, or if you want to have a further conversation, please feel free to kind of re-ask the question through that conversation later on. But we'll get through as many as we can today. So we've got until 15:15. Okay, so first of all, to go to some of the pre-submitted questions. So the first one that we had submitted was asking around how carbon pricing will be used in relation to whole life carbon emissions and pricing. So I'm kind of, since I'm here, I'm going to sort of start a little bit on that one around whole life carbon emissions. Just because that's kind of the whole life and life cycle assessment and things like that is sort of my area. So I think this is the only one really that I can contribute a bit to. So I'll answer a little bit on this, and then I'll hand over to Katya for the rest of this one and the rest of the questions. So yeah, so obviously I think yeah, carbon pricing can definitely be used in combination with various other methods. So with whole life emissions calculations and life cycle assessment and other kind of holistic approaches. So life cycle costing can all be combined for various purposes depending on the aims. So for example, for a manufacturing business or a business that produces something, it can be used for kind of decision making, for comparison of various approaches, or even products and materials. So this can all be, carbon pricing can be incorporated into that that environmentally positive decision making. Can focus on stages with the highest impact. Yeah, so it can definitely be all kind of linked together. Do you have anything further on that one, Katja, or should we move on to the more specific questions?
No, I think we can move to the more specific questions.
Okay, yeah. So some of these questions kind of cross over, so I think we'll come back to various elements of as well. But okay, so the second question that was submitted previously was, do you think there is any mechanism for building in carbon pricing or credits into housing and the retrofit of property?
Yeah, so if we look at this from a perspective, let's say when I don't know, let's say your organization that make an investment into building various housing projects, so you might consider you might implement shadow pricing, for instance, in your decision-making process, as I mentioned. Let's say calculate associated emissions depending on the area that you're interested in, and introduce the carbon price for these emissions, and then compare this project. So you would compare obviously other aspects of this, but as this price will be also implemented already, and added up to the total price of a project, it will be easier to compare. So you'll just compare, different prices. So definitely there's certain ways of how you can implement a carbon pricing mechanism into decision-making processes on, let's say, building housing projects.
Yeah. Okay, great, thanks. So another question that was submitted previously with a kind of housing element to it. So we have a question here that says, how would carbon pricing help my council do more for retrofitting housing, protecting nature, and mitigating climate change? So it's quite a broad question.
Yeah, it is a very broad question. I mean, again, the similar approach as to what I've just described could be applied in the decision-making process on different levels. I'm not going to touch on the anything related to the regulation, because this is not probably our remit, and the different factors that need to be considered in terms of, for example, how could different carbon tax regulations then fund help with funding of retrofitting projects. But yeah, internally, as a council, you can introduce this shadow pricing when deciding on what is the best project you can put in place, and you can proceed with developing.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we have a few. I'm trying to kind of group the questions together. I'm not sure how successful I'm going to be, but so we have a next kind of category, which is around. So the first one was, who regulates carbon pricing in the UK?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we do have this carbon trade system, or emissions trading system. So that's regulated by the so-called emission trading system authority, as far as I remember. And this authority is composed of England, well, of the countries of the UK. And there is also, obviously, there's a specific mechanism, so environmental agency. They do have there is a website where you can there's a registry where you can submit your allowances, and actually, so the whole system is managed from a technical perspective, it's managed through this registry.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to ask the last of the previously submitted questions, and then we'll go into the new ones. So final one that was submitted previously was, how to avoid greenwash and companies not taking the right elimination actions of carbon emissions and being self-satisfied.
Well, it's probably something, I mean, not in particular related to carbon pricing, but in general, if I give my opinion, I would say that obviously certain regulation, there are two aspects, is the regulation. So the messaging on the communication should be quite clear, and there should be certain regulation on this communication to the wider public. And obviously the awareness raising among the public. So let's say me as a specialist, when I see certain claims made on certain products, I'm a bit skeptical about this, because I know what sits behind this, and I'm obviously like sometimes by looking at the product, okay, there's obviously the information from my point of view, there's information like it, but I appreciate that not everyone is working in the same field as I do, and but if there is more information available, and it's easier to use this information and apply in your day-to-day life, this is obviously can also help to avoid this greenwashing. But yeah, there are two sides, regulation and awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did discuss greenwash and sort of that kind of thing at the end of the previous webinar as well, I think. So if anybody is going back to look at those that discussion, I think in the last 15 or 20 minutes of that one, you would find some more discussion of that. Okay, so into some of the questions that were asked today. So we have one, when carbon pricing is implemented with internal taxes and fees, if the money is spent on projects outside your organization, does that effectively mean it becomes offsetting? For example, like the extra optional fees with air travel.
Could you please repeat the question? So when the money...
So when carbon pricing is implemented with internal taxes and fees, if the money is spent on projects outside your organization, does that effectively mean it becomes offsetting?
Well, we can call it that way.
So,
it depends on what type of...
It
depends on what type of projects you spend it on. So let's say, as I showed on one of my slides in an energy saving trust, we do have like our scope 3 category contributes a lot towards our total amount of emissions. Within this scope 3, we have purchased goods and services. So this is something that's emissions associated with goods and services that we procure from various providers. So let's say if we spend the money actually in supporting our providers to reduce their emissions, this will or supporting different programs that can help them to reduce these emissions, this will in turn help us to reduce our own emissions. Right, so it will help us to, because there will be less emissions associated with the production of their goods and services, and then our own emissions will be reduced. But obviously it can help, it can mean that if you can use this funding into purchasing offsets, and it's not always a bad thing to do. It depends on the quality of the offsets and the durability. We will not be able to only achieve our net zero targets by only reducing the emissions. There will need to be a certain amount of carbon captured from the atmosphere using various technologies, which are at the moment are quite expensive to use. So by driving and supporting these different technologies can help with price, driving the price of them lower, and thereby helping us to achieve net zero targets.
Yeah. And that, yeah, there's a whole other webinar in there, isn't there? Or definitely, yeah. A whole other
Yes.
few webinars. Yes. Okay, so we'll jump on to the next question. So that was a shorter one. So this one is, what kinds of organizations / what size of organizations would carbon pricing be appropriate for?
It's a very good question. Again, as I described in my presentation, there are different types of carbon pricing mechanism, and you can establish the boundaries in very different ways. So obviously, let's say, yeah, it depends. So when you are a larger organization, you can introduce carbon pricing in, like, for example, for different departments, and then this different teams that they charged this, let's say, fees or taxes. But and it might not be something applicable for a small organization because you just consist of I don't know, 100 to, well, I mean, even less number of people, so whom you're going to charge this for. But then you can implement other mechanism. For example, as I mentioned, business travel. Pretty much all the organizations, they do business travel, and it's important to reduce your emissions. It's important to go with lower carbon modes of transport where it's feasible, and by incentivizing these lower carbon modes and putting the price on carbon for, let's say, for example, flights, can help for people to shift to use, let's say, trains more often, or not to go for certain business trips. So it can even be, like, not a high price, but yeah, it can start small. Also, you don't need necessary to always collect the funds, so you can use this shadow pricing, as I mentioned, and it can be used in any type of organization when you make a decision. For example, for a small organization, it could mean, let's say, if you want to move to a new office, you can compare the offices by using this shadow pricing mechanism. Whereas obviously, for example, for a large organization, shadow pricing can be used for making investments. So it just depends on what type of challenges you face, and you can always adjust and choose the appropriate mechanism.
Yes, great, thank you. So time for a couple more, I think. So sticking with the kind of cost and size of organization thing. So we have a question. Do you have any recommendations for where carbon pricing is not sufficiently influencing internal behavior, as the highest emitters also have the strongest financial flexibility to afford the additional carbon price?
I wouldn't be able to provide an example like this. Can you repeat this question again, Stuart, please?
Yeah, so I think it was looking for a recommendation for kind of what to do. So do you have any recommendations for where carbon pricing is not sufficiently influencing internal behavior, as the highest emitters also have the strongest financial flexibility to afford the additional carbon price? So I think it's asking around what should we do for the fact that, you know, high emitters who are rich organizations can basically afford to pay rather than change, and what if there's any solutions to that, if I've interpreted it correctly.
Yeah, well, if you're talking about, let's say, some external interventions in terms of putting, let's say, a tax, etc. So I would say that increasing the tax, and then, I mean, this is quite an obvious, not an obvious, but like, this will then obviously, the carbon tax needs to be if your objective is to change to shift the behavior, right, and to make the companies, for example, aware and to consider that the carbon and in the decision-making processes. Obviously, if the tax doesn't work, then it could be the tax obviously could be increased, and it could be increased in the proportion. If it's like for a larger organization, it could become higher, you know, and remain the same for like a smaller businesses if there is one. Like with the cap and trade mechanism at the moment, it doesn't apply to all the organization. It applies only to high emitting organizations. So certain segregation can be put in place, and if something doesn't work, you can either try something different, or you can, with in carbon pricing, just increase the tax.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we also have a couple of questions around local authorities. So the first, so I'll ask you them both together. But so the first one is, do you have an example of any local authorities that have done this? And whether which kind of another question answers that question, saying a number of local authorities apply a carbon price that developers are required to pay to offset any residual emissions. Fine. They use widely different costs per ton of carbon, and the question is, what is the right price?
Again, in terms of what is,
I think if you could just talk at all about how we look at the people that have come up with different prices for the same thing, and how we assess which is a good one, and or how we would consider that in future. Presumably, we want to come down all agreeing on one price. How we look at what that right price is.
Again, the right price is the price that helps you to meet your objectives. So let's say when we introduce this internally as an organization, as I mentioned, the very first step is to define your objectives and to understand what you would like to achieve with introducing this mechanism. What type of what you would like to tackle? If something, if the price that you're established doesn't work, then you need to change it. If it works for you, if you see, for example, if your ambition is to influence the introduction of more energy efficient projects, for example, then if you see that your price doesn't play a huge role into this decision making process, you can then increase it. Or if it, for example, if it's too high and other aspects are widely neglected, then you can decrease it. So it's often about trying it out, putting this in place, and see whether it brings any results.
Yeah.
And I won't give you the number now as to what is the exact, despite what the webinar says. We're not gonna tell you exactly what is the price of carbon. So it all needs to be considered on the depending on the organization, its type, and objectives that it pursues.
Yeah, great. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think I oversimplified that a little. Okay, so I think that's a good place to call it a day. So I've got 12:14. So I think that just gives us a minute for me to say thank you to everybody. So first of all, thank you to Megan, our BSL interpreter. Obviously, thank you, Katya, for doing all the hard work and answering loads of questions. Thank you, everybody, for your time and for asking your questions. Sorry. If we didn't get a chance to get to yours, or if you have further questions, feel free to fill out the form in the chat, or fill in the form, and we'll we can arrange to have a chat with you. I think we will have a record of the questions that we haven't got to today. There were just 2 or 3, so we'll get back to you with those if we can. And if you're interested in attending any of our future webinars, you'll be able to find the information through the chat, or if you follow the link to the previous recording, you'll be able to find the rest of them there and be able to register and have a look at the rest of those. So I think we can call it a day there. Thank you again, everybody, and yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.